My name is Charlene Liu, and I live in Eugene, Oregon. I'm an artist and a teacher, and I work primarily in painting, printmaking, and papermaking. In my work, I'm primarily interested in creating landscapes that have a multitude of perspectives and that also are rather ungrounded in the sense that there is no foreground or background space, and that really this idea or the aesthetic of multiplicity and hybridity is the emphasis or the forefront. And this is a way for me to address my questions and my interests in culture and heritage and cultural hybridity and being Chinese American as an artist living in the States, and to also think about the future, ideas about empathy and around difference and what we might take from our lived experience and teach or pass on to our students or to our community or our children. And I do this through my creative work in painting and in printmaking and in papermaking and installation. And so I really do want to connect and communicate with an audience to make them feel a sense of familiarity and joy through color and through playful forms, and to also really respond like emotionally and psychologically to the visual experience in front of them, and through that experience to be able to think about more philosophical questions around identity, around the ways that we connect with each other and the ways that we experience and connect to nature and to our landscape and to our everyday experience and environment. I've wrapped up a couple of big projects. One of them is an installation for the Pacific Asia Museum in a show, Another Beautiful Country, Moving Images by Chinese American Artists, curated by Jenny Lin. And that show, I created an installation that was essentially a very evocative and abstract recreation of my family's Chinese American restaurant in Wisconsin. And I incorporated laser cut screens using patterns that were drawn from both the German American aesthetic of the region and from an East Asian Chinese patterns. And I also use objects that were originally in the restaurant, including the tablecloths and some of the Americana or thrift store finds, some really beautiful antique vases, and a lot of knockoffs that are just meant to be representative of a very exotic East, in a Chinese restaurant in the Midwest. I also had prints that incorporated some of the print ephemera, such as the restaurant ads that were in the local newspapers, and photographs of my mother cooking in the kitchen in the restaurant. And I made a lot of paper flowers because that was part of the decor of the space, and I had tables with chairs around it. And so in some ways, I was maybe halfway to making a restaurant I could actually open up, but the whole thing was an art project. And I wanted to talk about the history of growing up in that space and the history of immigrant businesses run by families in America. So the process and the methodology of printmaking really speaks very directly to the content of my work. Ideas such as multiplicity, repetition, material transfer, maybe as an analogy for cultural transfer. I also think about mirroring, because when you transfer a plate, the reverse of it happens. Everything is always like a mirror or a doubling effect. I can take something that can multiply, to the extent that I am willing to repeat it, and how I can sort of talk about growth or expansion, or the way that you can always make a copy, and every copy is essentially authentic and original if you want to have that kind of conversation that's sort of historical and traditional in printmaking. But I also use new digital tools. And the field of printmaking and the scholarship printmaking has always had one foot in industrial application and commercial applications, and also fine art. So the installation that recently made called China Palace at the Pacific Asia Museum, I I thought about that in some ways as a large-scale unfolding artist book or print, because the screens and the patterns that were designed could be repeated. They were designed to be modular, and I thought that, well, they were on one hand formed of walls and a screen that was essentially a giant book that unfolded and told a story. As I was making my most recent project, I really dwelled upon the thought and really my experience about how quickly one can lose our cultural traditions, such as I don't know how to cook Chinese food. I don't really speak the language fluently anymore. I left the country too young and never learned how to read and write fluently. And I think even small things, such as how we might celebrate a holiday, the practice of gifting, the way that we express love, culturally. And those are all ideas that I think in my work I both wanted to think about really clearly and specifically in regards to my Chinese, Taiwanese American heritage, and also very much of growing up in the American Midwest and being very unconnected to a larger community of being disconnected from a larger Chinese community, because it was growing up in the Midwest in a small town in the 80s and 90s. We were the only Chinese family in town. I think showing at the Pacific Asian Museum, which is a museum that's located in Pasadena, and it serves its local community with activities for story time and workshops with many of the immigrant communities in the area, made it a really great context for me, and I thought it was quite exciting to be able to bring my work to that audience and to tell a story that they might feel a really strong connection to. So community in regards to the audience that I can connect with has been on my mind. And partly that is because community in the space of a restaurant has been a theme that I've been thinking about. And of course, as a faculty or professor and educator at the University of Oregon, the community of my colleagues is really important to me, and as important also the community of my students. So I think that relationship with my students and with my colleagues has been a really strong aspect of building my creative community in Eugene, Oregon. The painting Soup Spoon is a smash up of a number of ideas and themes and genres. It is a soup spoon in which you're eating a bowl of soup, and it is also a waterfall cascading in a pool, and it's a rainbow at the same time. And so the inability to hold on to the shape of things when you're looking at something that's also very graphic and distinct is in many ways an analogy to me of the experience of living in the world in which there are so many contradictions and so many layered in a multitude of experiences that are both good and bad, funny, sad, and nothing is ever straightforward, even if we try to look and try to understand something in a very clear-cut way. And so I think the painting speaks to that space emotionally and psychologically for me, and this is often what I'm trying to find in my work.